Attorney Tucker.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2 weeks, finally get here. And as I stated as we began, that the judge would instruct you on the law, the judge would instruct you on the roles, and the judge would give you guidance to take all that you've heard, all that you've seen, all that you've been through this last week and a half. And I told you that I would try to get as much evidence out so you could see the full picture. Because as I said, when we're dealing with the verdict, you must honestly be seeking the truth. Wanting to hear more, wanting to see more, wanting to see the full picture of what happened. To hear what really happened, why this occurred, how this occurred, and why not. So as we began, we started with the opening. Of course, I gave you a little story out there to try to keep you interested. And I think we got more to talk about than that bullseye. So I want to go through what you saw here today, because the judge is going to say everything I say, everything the state says is not evidence. So you to disregard it. But I don't want you to disregard what I'm saying, because I'm not trying to say it's evidence. I'm just trying to be a highlighter. From all the evidence we were able to get out, I just want to be able to highlight it and say, this is what I felt was important. This is what I think you would want to know is important. And then it's up to you to decide. Was it important? Was it not? Was it something that I needed to see? Was it not? So we started off fully understanding that the state has the heaviest burden in the world to prove all this evidence of what they have put in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt. You probably heard things like probable cause, which is a very low threshold. Preponderance of the evidence of one has 51%. They win. And then reasonable doubt being the highest standard out there. And the judge is going to read to you what reasonable doubt is and what classifies something that is reasonable or not. And I'll let her go ahead and do that. And I won't try to waste your time with that, but I will start at looking at it as a heavy burden the state had to prove. And they brought up the first witness, and it was Mr. Herring's sister. And she got on the stand, and she showed a picture of her brother, God rest his soul. And she talked about how she knew he had diabetes. She knew. She's a sister. But that standard is very high, beyond a reasonable doubt. Why wouldn't a doctor come in here and say, I have been there, I've tested him, I've seen it, I've instructed him what to do, and he has diabetes, and this is what diabetes does, and this is how it affects you, and give you everything so there's no question of what diabetes does. There's no question of why there's needles in the vehicle, so many of them. There's no question on how somebody would feel if they had high blood sugar or low blood sugar. We didn't get that. And from there, jumped right into Mr. Robinson, Terry Robinson, that state official. And he comes in and he says, you know, I was there at the accident. The first accident that involved Mr. Herring and Mr. Stanley Kimball. And Mr. Kimball was not here to testify. And Mr. Robinson said, Mr. Herring was walking around his vehicle. He saw him run the red light. Saw him hit this 18-wheeler. Saw Ms. Payne there. Pull over, concerned, see what's going on. Everybody okay? And he starts talking about something's wrong. Something's wrong with him. And in the 911 tapes, you hear him going back and forth with an exchange. Doing something wrong. Did you do something wrong? Is it a crime? And him saying, sir, you just... And he stopped. He didn't say run the red light because he knew it was on the phone call with 911. He didn't want to prejudice that case in any form or fashion. But he saw what he saw. And then when he's talking to Mr. Herring and telling him, stay away from the car, that thing's about to blow up. I mean, it's smoking, radiation fluids coming out of it. It's not reasonable to think somebody could just hop in that vehicle and just drive off. But yet, his testimony was that he walked around it, he made sure the tires were okay, nothing's going to stop it from moving. He got in it and revved it up. He revved it up and you hear my mom going, sir, get out of the way, move out of the way. Get the tag, get the tag. And he says he gets in his vehicle and starts driving off. There's no reason given. There's no doctor to come in and say, well, this is what occurred. It's just an individual who's a state official, who we find out later is a correctional officer, but who gives his account of what occurred. And when talking with him at the stand, what he had said at the incident location and what he had said the day it happened, it was a little bit different. He was using words like confused. Sergeant wasn't really doing much, kind of just out of it. Now, he himself, even though he is working at a medical correctional facility, he doesn't have any medical training. He doesn't know what to classify, what to look for, or what to do unless somebody comes and tells him that this person has a disorder, or this person has needs, special needs, or this person needs this. But yet, he wants to give examples of confused, out of it. Whereas in his statements in the report and his interview at the precinct, he was irritated. He was walking around the vehicle. He was looking into it, trying to get into it, looking to see what's in it. Then he cranks it up, and he revs it up, and he drives off. So that's how it all begins. And in the meantime, he's on the phone with 911. Miss Payne's on the phone with 911. And they're talking to them both. And the one thing both of them wanted, and the one thing 911 wanted, was that tag information, the tag number. Now, you heard testimony that he'd already caused one accident. And she was looking out for the safety. Now, smartest thing in the world to do, to get behind a car from somebody who's being erratic, somebody who's leaving the scene when you got an officer telling you not to. It's not the smartest thing. But when you have good intentions in your heart and you're trying to help somebody, and you don't think, she's never been in an environment or a situation to ever think somebody's going to grab her and say, I got something for you, bitch. She would never contemplate that. So she gets behind and tells 911, hey, I didn't get it, but I'm going to go get it. And you meet Mr. Robbins. Good, go. But yet he wanted to say, I told her not to go. I told her she shouldn't chase. But you heard the 911 tape. You never once heard him say that. But it was a little bit different, a little bit more biased. And maybe media played a part, maybe memory played a part. But you can decide that yourself. You heard his testimony. And pretty much, besides coming to the scene later on, that's about all he can help. That's all he can add to this story. And he added a little of his own flavor in it to say, I did this and did not. But as we talked when we were choosing the jury, and I said the mannerisms and what you see from an individual on the stand, y'all know if they're telling the truth or not. Y'all know if somebody is not being as truthful as they can or trying to hide something. So they get Mr. Robinson down, and then you hear Miss Sumter. And she's the 911 custodian, operator. I'm not sure it really claimed out what it was, but she works at the 911 call center. And she's there and she says, hey, we take calls. We record them. We hand them to our upper people and they make sure nothing alters them. They make sure nothing changes. And that's about all she can say. And she says, hey, this 911 sounds to be in the same shape, form that we received. But she never received that 911 call. She was not the operator. So we have to just take her word for it. Because there's nothing really to contradict. So she comes in here and gives an explanation of the 911. And we hear it. And you hear exactly what we were hoping you to hear. That very calm voice of Miss Payne. Ma'am, there's been an accident. I don't know if I'm supposed to call you. I don't know if somebody else has called you, but I just want to let you know there's an accident and this is the location. And later on, as he's walking around, being irritated, grabbing, looking at his car, not answering questions, trying to find out if he's done something wrong or not, then you hear her say, ma'am, it's taking forever. What's going on here? And of course you heard testimony that traffic was bad and that it was difficult to maneuver to where you needed to. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I'm just telling what evidence was presented. So this traffic jam and this delay of the law enforcement to come out there and write a report to find out what's going on. In this delay, there was an opportunity, a gap. And in this gap, Mr. Herring decides he's going to go. She's going to leave. And she said, ma'am, I'm safe. I'm in my car. I'm just going to follow him and get that tag number for you. And you did hear her say, ma'am, we don't want you to chase. We just want you to be safe. The second time it was said, they're talking at the same time. So how one heard the other, I'm not sure, but they were talking at the same time. And they were calm. And they were speaking calm and saying, hey, and then there's radio silence. Nobody's saying, stop, you need to stop right now. Don't follow. It's dangerous. You got to stop. No, nothing. Radio silence. So you think, okay. In their training, they're taught to say, hey, y'all don't need to chase, but get that tag. We got to do this so that things don't happen to us. So don't chase. It's our policy, but hey, get that tag. So she's following this car, not knowing, not understanding what could happen, because she's never been in this. She's 21 years old, never been in a situation like that. In her mind, she's a young individual trying to help out. She hasn't seen the bad sides. Heard the old phrase, no good deed goes unpunished. So she's trying to assist, and in doing so, she's hanging back enough to get the tag number. And she does, and she reports it to him. In the meantime, we heard that Mr. Kimball had already got that tag number and given it to Robinson, who gave it to 911. So in this time, Miss Payne is following. Why didn't somebody say, hey, we already got the tag? Stop. No one did. Amongst the confusion, it's still, you're safe, you're behind them, just the tag. And then she says, you need to come back to the location. And you need to stop. She goes, man, I'm not going to follow me. He's already caused one accident. We're the police. I'll just hang back here till the police gets. Now, if the traffic is as bad as they said, what's you going to do? Pull off? Where are you going to go? You got traffic. The traffic wasn't as bad as it was perceived. Because later on you hear Mr. Williams, as he's cruising by the whole thing, puts his hand out there with the phone, tapes it on. It looked like he was concerned about traffic or anything. When you see the pictures of where the car finally ended up, you see there's a big gap that somebody could have gone around to the right. Mr. Williams is actually going to the left. He just videotaped it. So you try to take everything you hear and try to visually picture it. And you've heard up to now that he got diabetes, or whatever that's worth. Then you heard, well, you know, it was irritable, he was walking around crazy, he wasn't listening to me. He sure as hell wasn't listening to me. But he's confused. Kind of how that changed, I do not know. How those stories changed. But you, the decider of fact, can take what you've heard and take what you listened to and saw, and you can decide that for yourself. And that's what I wanted. I wanted all the evidence out here so y'all could decide. So after something comes up there with the 911, then they bring McCraney in. And she sits down. She's got a good story she's telling it. She's wound up. She's talking about, yeah, I saw it. It was crazy. She jumped in the window. Now, literally, we don't know. There's no way she could have jumped in the window. But you try to extract from what they say. As we said, every time there's a story, there's a little bit of truth in it. A little bit of truth. So maybe the part that she was in the window is when she's being pulled in the window. Maybe the part that she jumps when she's pulling back and getting pulled in. We don't know. But you heard the testimony the same I did. And you'll get to decide out of that, was it really believable that she came up and said the vehicle stopped like an inch away from it. Vehicle stopped like an inch away from a vehicle. It appears they hit. But it was like an inch, so give or take. And then she said she pulled up like a foot. But she was behind the Jeep at that time. And she couldn't see what was going on. But she heard a gunshot. So, we got a person jumping in the window, somehow, some way, or whatever, and a gunshot. So we know there's a gunshot. And a lot of people congregate and start going back and forth on who did what, how they did what. And that ends up being the testimony from the friend. Then you hear a detective Roland come in and say, hey, I just did my job. I went to the jail, I swabbed her, I'm out of here. Short and sweet. How you going to dispute something like that? If it was done properly, let's get them on the stand and get them out. So they swabbed them. They got DNA. And then you have Ashley Hoss. She comes in and she says, you know what? I do fingerprinting. I do that job that everybody always wants to hear. You hear in these shows and movies. Out there at dust, I get the fingerprints, we take the laminate, we look at the genes, the alleles, we look at everything we can. Then we compare. And we compare. The one thing they didn't compare is any kind of fingerprints or any kind of DNA on the trigger. The trigger of the gun. That seems to be what it was at dispute. The trigger. Who pulled the trigger? What happened with the trigger? But nobody tested it. But they did test the gun for DNA. And they came in and said, there's DNA. There's a dominant DNA. And there's a minor DNA. And we all sit here and we learn something new about DNA as we're listening. And they said the dominant's going to be more of one person's DNA than the other. And probably no surprise to you, there's more DNA from Miss Payne on her gun than there is from somebody else. So, but they did say there were two males' DNA on this gun. And it was on the slide. The top of the gun, where the bullet would eject, or the shell would eject once it's been discharged. There's male DNA on it. There's two men. So as you hear, as we go further, you hear that there was a hand in the struggle between Mr. Herring and Miss Payne. And his hand got on top of that slide. And they were fighting back and forth. She had a good grip sometimes. She didn't have a good grip sometimes. But there was male DNA. So you can look at it, and as they talk about circumstantial evidence, you conclude that it was Mr. Herring. But who's this other male DNA? Where'd this other male come from? And you heard her say she took the gun off, handed it to Officer Ritchie, who had no gloves on. He was hanging on to that gun for a while. He had to, until he could go put it in evidence. So there's your other male DNA. So we're slowly building up to see evidence that may be helpful, that might not be helpful. And as we continue, then you hear from Emily Curran. And she's talking about how she looks at the fingerprints, the palm prints, evidence collected, DNA, all that stuff collected. She takes it. She works with the lab. She gets things going. And she starts talking about the cartridge and the container. And as I jumped in there and finally said, we're just talking about a magazine. I mean, we're talking about a clip and bullets, right? I mean, sometimes when we're dealing with doctors and the GBI and everybody else, a little smarter than us, they talk a little bit higher than us. But I wanted to make sure we knew what she was talking about. And that was the clip and the bullets in it. And she kind of said there was some that would be enough to test, and there was some of the stuff that wouldn't be enough to test. But why would you want to test the bullets and the clip? It's her gun. Who else is putting bullets and clip in her gun? But they never once mentioned about testing the trigger. We got DNA on the slide, that's good. But we don't know what's on the trigger. And maybe it was because they didn't get a big enough sample, or somebody didn't do their job right and get a sufficient sample for them to test. But we do know one thing. It wasn't tested. So we don't know who's the dominant, who's the minor, or who's is on the trigger. And from there, the witness, Miss Rosser. And Miss Rosser got up and she started talking about what she perceived happened. And I believe I showed her where everybody else was using this map to show where the roads are, where it all happened. And I'm not sure, maybe it was her parents. I mean, some people don't, recognize markers or where they were. But she started saying something was going on up here. Everybody else saying it's going on here. But she says it's going on up top. And she says that she was in a car by herself. She was looking at the ceiling. But she saw Miss Payne run to the car and try to conceal herself. Put a hoodie on. A bright pink hoodie. If somebody's trying to conceal themselves, they're not going to put a bright hoodie on. But she never once mentioned that her shirt was ripped and exposing herself. But she saw it all. She saw what happened, and she could testify. And her statement was, a white male came out of a vehicle that drove up behind him and then drove off once he saw the gun. If somebody's going to interject themselves in a situation like that, I don't think they'd wait for somebody to turn around. And I think they would have stopped it, or grabbing it, or stopping it, or somehow thwarting what was going on. But once again, I wasn't there. I can only go off what they're saying. And she said, you know what? This white guy walked in, he had somebody else in the car. He saw what was going on. She turned around, never pointed the gun at him, never got aggressive to him. But he said, that's enough for me. I'm out of here. This ain't worth it. So I asked her about the traffic. And she said, oh, it was clear. She said, I was in the turning lane up here. I could see everything clear. You're in a turning lane on a busy highway. 2, that traffic is miserable but she could see clear. So really, how bad was that traffic? Now, I know that the officer said he was there stopping people from going down 285, and everybody here knows how irritating it is when you need to get on the highway and they're stopping. You got to reroute you. So maybe there was some traffic there, but not enough to block her vision. Where she said she was right there, kind of side to side, looking at it. I think she said 10 yards. 10 yards. I don't know. I usually like to hear feet, but everybody has their preference. 10 yards from it. And she saw her gun out, holding him at gunpoint. And blah! She didn't see it. She heard it. But notice. Blah! So did it happen in the car? Did it happen out of the car? From her testimony, I don't think you really understand, or I don't think you get a good impression of what happened and where it happened. But that's for y'all to decide. That's for y'all to take her testimony and compare it to the other witnesses. Because remember, they've had 4 years to get these witnesses together. And I asked the witnesses, did y'all talk to the media? I mean, why the difference in the story? Did you talk to somebody else? You talk to the media? You talk to the detectives? No. Yeah, I talked to the media. Yes, I talked to the detectives. And yes, I talked to Bonnie. And they're here giving testimony that's different from what they initially gave. And you, as the decider of facts, has got to decipher from the story that you heard from the first account, the story you heard from the second account. My opinion is, when you go back and you talk about what you heard, they're not going to measure. It's not going to be something that you can see or put together or say, yeah, this is kind of close, it's kind of not close. So, I think we took a break there and we went on to day number 2. And day number 2, I believe it was the forensic examiner. And she was here. She's a tough cookie. She turned to you when it was asked questions from the state. She turned to you and was talking. Friendly. Explaining everything. And I kept asking her. Your report said the bullet went right to left. There's a slight downward angle. Right to left. That means if he was in the car and the gun was outside the car, it'd have gone left to right. Well, it depends on what the position of the driver was. When she wrote that report, there was a position in her head that she had that driver sitting at when she said it was right to left. And I asked as many times as I could before I was stopped to try to get an answer out of what position was that driver in. I don't think we ever heard it, but we all know that when she wrote that report, there was a position he was in that she came to the conclusion the bullet went right to left, a slight slope down. I asked her to draw me a picture of it. Show me if it goes in the body, because in her reports it talks about organs that it hit. She didn't want to run it. She didn't want to draw a line. She said, there's a dot here, there's a dot there. That's all I'm doing. So, usually you're dealing with forensic examiners. They're going to tell you everything that's going on. And she said, well, we can't really talk about diabetes because the body, when it begins, to rigor mortis begins and the process goes and the deceased is there, it's going to eat up that sugar immediately. So we can't say one way or the other. But what really is around? I mean, no one's coming here to testify what diabetes does or how it would affect you. It's all speculation. And she goes and says, no. And then I ask about the drug test. And she says, well, it's comprehensive. I understand comprehensive. Y'all understand comprehensive. But there were 5 specific drugs that were singled out. And in the report, it says, out of those 5 drugs, and it says specifically those 5 drugs, it was negative. Cocaine, opiates, benzyme, nothing about amphetamines, nothing about other, as she said, common addictive drugs. But it's a comprehensive test. And we didn't get into that report about, was it a hair follicle? Was it blood? Was it urine? What was tested? How was it tested? We never got into it. So, as we say, it's comprehensive. That should be enough. That should be enough for y'all to believe there was no drugs in the system. The test was done 2 days after. So, she quickly gets off the stand and she goes. And then we have Cameron Williams. Cameron Williams. Nice guy, seemed personable. He gets up here and he talks about how, hey man, I videotaped it. And I'm watching it and I see a struggle. And as they're struggling, all of a sudden I hear a big, and it's a gunshot. And this gunshot goes off. And he goes, oh hell no. So he's got a video. He gets out. He gets up right beside Miss Payne. And on the 911 tape, you hear her say, sir, did you see what happened? Can you stay here to tell what happened? And he didn't really respond. But you see him talking to the officers. I got to go. I don't want to be involved. I got to go. They said, you got a video. Could you give it to me? You give me your email address. You ain't getting it off my phone. I wouldn't want anybody to have my phone number either, so I'm not condemning for that, but I did notice that he wasn't going to send it to him from his phone. It was going to have to be an email. And you heard that his dad is law enforcement. And we don't know what his dad said to him. It would have been hearsay. But we don't know when the video was given. But we do know the state brought out that he had contacted her, mentioned he had a DUI, and wanted to know what she did. And she did the most professional thing you can do in her position. Ooh, I don't do misdemeanors. I can't help you on this. I don't want anything to taint this case. But it's never said when the video was turned over. And he's up here testifying. And then he gets up and he goes with the investigators to refresh his memory on the video. Because there's a interview with him that it's been a while. Then he goes off to refresh it. He comes back and pretty much says what he sees on the video, and you've seen it. I know a lot of people say, I've got to see it to believe it. I don't want to hear it, I want to see it. So you see it on the video. And he gives what he saw, and what he saw was there. A struggle, going back and forth, fighting over the gun, punching from both sides, struggling, going back and forth. I didn't see the gunshot, I didn't see where the gun was. There was a gunshot. Oh, by the way, she jumped out and grabbed the shell. She jumped out and grabbed the bullet shell. What is it, a sniper? I mean, nobody stands out there and picks up a bullet shell. Unless you're in the movies. Unless you're doing something wrong. So why is that twist put in there? Why would it even be brought up? I showed him the picture of the phone, of her picking up the phone, a still shot. That shell must have been behind it. Must have been behind it. I don't know why that twist was put on there. But his testimony was pretty good. It was almost the same as what you saw in the video. Except for that one little biased twist of her picking up a shell. And we'd heard the examiners had come in between when he was stepped out to refresh his memory. And we got Lavoie that talks about the process it takes to get a palm print, to get DNA, and taking it and checking it against layman prints, and what the prints can tell you, and the alleles, and the finger, and the DNA, and how it all meshes together to say, hey, I'm positive this is that DNA and this is that DNA. But there wasn't a sufficient palm print taken or wasn't sufficient evidence brought in for her to conclusively say, I know whose DNA or I know whose fingerprints were here and there. But never tested the trigger. Never tested the trigger. Once again, they have their procedures and they have their orders. Never tested the trigger. If you want to prove something beyond reasonable doubt, you test that trigger. But it was never tested. And then you have Cynthia Squin, I believe was her name. And she talks about the forensic biology. And she's the one that comes in and says, hey, I got something for you that's relevant. I got something that's important. There's DNA on that slide. There's DNA on that slide. Male DNA. And there's female DNA all around the gun. But there's DNA on the slide. And the key part there is later on when Officer Ritchie comes in and says that spent shell was stuck in the chambers. Was stuck in the chambers. It never came out. The shell never came out. Why? Logic would say that something was obstructing it. Something that when it pulled back, left DNA on it. But the shell never came out. So when he said that, I picked up the shell, or she picked up the shell, there's no way she picked up the shell. It was never discharged. So you have to take that story with a grain of salt. And then we continue to go through a bunch of pictures of what happened and where the cars were. And Detective Moore gets up there and says, hey, I was there. I interviewed, I talked to her. Yeah, I took pictures. And these pictures were taken at the very end. The interview at the very end. Didn't really want to take pictures unless somebody said, hey, I need pictures taken because she said she was scratched. She was grabbed. She was hit. She was bruised. And every account saying that she's pounding Herring. Not a bruise, a scratch on, well, a pin-top bruise on the left shoulder. That's all they could say. They never said any bruises, scratches, or anything else. But you saw the pictures of Miss Payne. Scratched on her head, on her arm, her wrist, swollen, her eye, swollen. Pictures may not have given the best representation, but we all know those bruises don't come until after a day or so. And Detective Moore says, okay, I took those pictures, and here they are. And I took out a ruler, and I measured those pictures so that we can have an accurate representation of what size and what scratches and all these just little breaks or whatever, if it was a deep or cut or long. So that's all her testimony. And then you have Officer Ritchie. He shows up. The one that was there, the one that was doing the most. He shows up. He takes the gun from Miss Payne with no glove. He puts the gun down. He tries to assist. He can't get into that door on the driver's side. The door that Hayward kept saying, was it open? Was it closed? Did you open it? Did you close it? How could it be open? Were you trying to keep it shut? That door wasn't working. And Richie could not get into that door. And when I asked him was it because of the accident or whatever, he goes, I'm not going to speak. I'm just going to tell you I couldn't get in the door. So he goes around. And he gets in there. And they're talking with Mr. Herring. Keep here. Hang on. And they're getting the EMTs, getting him in the EMTs. And he's leaving, and he says, you know what? They're optimistic. They're in the EMTs. I've done my job. Kind of looks in the truck a little bit. Sees all this stuff in the truck. And then y'all saw it in the pictures, and you heard testimony. There's a knife. There's a little saw. There's a cooler. And asked Detective Moore, what's in the cooler? Because if there was insulin in that vehicle, it must be cool. It must be kept at a cold temperature. And it would have been in that cooler. They didn't want to go and look into that cooler. They didn't want to completely say, beyond a reasonable doubt, he was a diabetic because all these needles and there's insulin. But they couldn't say that. And it was not in the cooler. If it was, they'd been sitting there waiting, guess what we found? But there's nothing. And what they took as evidence from the vehicle to help in their investigation, what did they take? Nothing. It didn't appear like they wanted to find anything of use. They just looked it over, took pictures. And he sits there and he testifies to what he thought might be important, what he thought he might would collect, what he thought he might collect it for. And he said, but I didn't do it. There were other people who were doing it. He rattled off how many officers? 4 or 5? 4 or 5. Do we ever hear from those 4 or 5? No. No. We finish with that. We look at his body cam. We see how everybody is standing around Miss Payne, talking to all the bystanders. You shot him. She shot him. Did you shot him? You shot him. She's standing there. No, my finger was not on the trigger. And they're having a conversation. They're not getting aggressive with each other. They're not jumping on them and beating them because they think somebody shot somebody. They're having a conversation, trying to figure out what's going on. That's civilized. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to take a side and just get aggressive or do something. But yet, says, here he is. The motive for tracking down, chasing down, and shooting Mr. Herring is he's a bad driver. That trivial? A bad driver? If somebody had that kind of anger or something like that built inside them, they had issues on, they would have anger management, they had problems that would have been documented. Nothing's documented on this thing. She's not got a ticket, she's not in trouble anymore. So, you take all of these evidence, and that's the evidence. And then Miss Payne says, you know what, I want them to hear what happened. And I want them to hear it from my mindset, because everything you heard, it just didn't it didn't sound, it wasn't meshing together. It wasn't, some of it wasn't possible. Some of it wasn't logical. Some of it was just common. But I don't want to take it away from them, but I try to be real, because everyone can perceive something totally different than what really happened. We talked about that at the beginning. You can see the same thing happen. Two people have two opinions of it. But you have 4 years. 4 years. Take all these witnesses. Take everybody that talked to you. Everybody that saw it. And when you kind of put a few together that make sense or that are close to being exactly what happened, or close, but you didn't hear it. Did not hear it in the testimony of any of those witnesses. Miss Payne gets up there, and she's telling them what's going on in her mind. Yes, I heard them say, don't chase. And I heard them say, be safe. The second time, I think I was talking, I didn't hear it. But you heard it 4 times. I didn't hear it 4 times. They told me to come back. They didn't say, don't chase. They said, come back. You need to, both of y'all need to come back. And that's what she did. She pulled over. She had her phone out. And she said, I got the police on the phone. Let them see 911 on her phone. You know how the phones on the screens, they have who you're talking to. And she walks up and she's like, I got the police. You need to come back. They want you to come back. Whack. That phone's gone. That's on the ground. But it's still got 911 on it. She's thinking, somebody's got to hear this. And grab. And then all of a sudden, you see her shirt. And you saw in the pictures. And you'll see in the pictures when you go back there, her shirt is being pulled in. And her testimony is, I didn't pull the gun in. I don't know what people say. She walked up with the gun on her. Now, a couple of them said it wasn't until the car hit her Jeep that the gun was pulled out. But she said, I didn't pull the gun out then. I'm sitting here trying to get away. I'm trying to move back. He caught me by surprise. Never been in a situation like that. It's up to God she'll never be in a situation like that again. Because no good deed goes unpunished. And she knows that now. But before then, she's a people person. She's trying to help somebody out. We're going to help them out in Payne County, the place she grew up in. A place that we've heard stories. We've seen incidents. We've seen the news. She graduated high school. She went straight to work. And she's been working the best she can at these apartment complex. Obviously, they've given her some quick responsibility because she's going up picking up tills and showing properties by herself. And that's pretty scary for a 21-year-old. It's pretty scary for anybody. So she keeps that gun with her for protection. And she says, when I pulled it out, I thought it'd be a deterrent. I told her, hey buddy, I got a gun. You let go of me, let go of me, let go of me. Stop, get the fuck out of this car. You can't drive this car anymore because it's gonna blow up, it's smoking. And if you're out of that car, you can't cause any more problems. You can't hurt anybody, you can't cause another accident. How'd that work out for her? She's being dragged into that vehicle. She's being dragged down the road, whether it be like an inch, or whether it be the size of this table, or what. When you're grabbed, if you're pulled into a hole and you don't know what the world's going on because he's getting, I got something for you. I got something for you. And he's leaning back. She didn't try to say she saw something. She didn't try to say there was something in there that could hurt me. She told the truth. I don't know what was in there. I just know he was grabbing me. In my mind, it's like, holy cow, what is going on? But I got the police on the phone. How's that going to help her? How's that going to help her? In theory, you would hope they're close by. You're going to be safe. In reality, it's not that safe. So he's grabbing her, he's pulling her, he's ripping her shirt, scratching her. She says, I got a gun and I will shoot you. Is that enough deterrent? No. So she pulls it out and she sits there and eventually gets pushed up on the car, and her testimony was her hands like this on the car. And she's trying to push back. And you look in the pictures and the video, she's on her tippy toes. And you got dirt on her knees where she's pulling back, trying to get away. And you see a still shot that the state entered that has her pulled back like this. But you can use common sense, and you can use, after hearing what happened, what would cause a hand to come back that quick? If it's being held and you finally get it away. And she said that's all she wanted to do was get away. That's all she wanted to do. And when she pulled that gun, that she learned in training, when you pull it, if you mean to do harm, put your finger on that trigger. If you don't, you leave it up top. She didn't want to do any of that. She didn't get a chance to even think about it. She's trying to push off the car, and he grabs her. And you heard her testify. Grabs her right wrist and is trying to pull it back. And you see the swelling all over her wrist. And you saw the demonstrations I did with that gun. The way it was explained, the way it was told, the way the DNA showed that that top slide had DNA on it and that shell didn't eject. There's only one possibility on that. That hand was there just, obstructing that shell from being shot and shot out. And when you go and you put your hand on the top, the way he had her wrist, and you put your hand on the top, how many of my fingers went right into that trigger area? One time it was 2. When I asked Detective Haywood, how many fingers were there? 3. 3 fingers, 3 opportunities to pull that trigger. And when I asked Detective Haywood, in your interview with her, right after it happened, 2 hours after she sat there, 2 hours, and you sat there, and she said, he turned, pulled the trigger, and I heard a click. I heard a click. Turned and pulled the trigger. Now, he's a detective. He knows what the hell's going on when somebody pulls a trigger, pointing a gun at you. We didn't want him to speculate, but if a gun's pointed at somebody, and the trigger is pulled and it clicks, that's an aggravated assault. That's attempted murder. That's something right there to put your life in jeopardy. Nobody wants their life in jeopardy. Nobody wanted to be in that situation. But by God, now it's increased even more because she's thinking, oh my God, he's going to kill me. And you hear it say, I had a grip on it, I didn't have a grip on it. I was trying to get it back there. My hand was under the trigger. No, it's a trigger guard. And they went back and corrected a couple of times because sometimes she said my hand was on the trigger. My finger was on the trigger guard. My finger was on the trigger. In that kind of chaos, her hand is trying to push off. It's only natural to think your finger is going to stay with that gun as you're being twisted. If you're being twisted like this and it's on the trigger, you're not going to have those bruises on your arm. And how could it be if the hand's on top of it, turning at the angle it is? And remember the angle it is. He's sitting there in the truck. And it's being twisted right into his chest. It may have been at the angle at her, but in order to get to her, he's got to turn it around past him. And as he's doing that, he's got his fingers on the top, and they're going back and forth. The state's got one theory, one option, that finger of his Payne was on the trigger. As you heard and saw the demonstration, the man who's grabbing that gun, twisting it, possibly has two, possibly has three fingers in the trigger guard, on the trigger. That was never tested. So as you go back and you look at it and you listen, you review all the pictures and you hear all the evidence and you hear the judge say, the state's burden never changes. It's a burden, a heavy burden to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? And she starts off with the presumption of innocence. So you got old lady justice here, and she's got the scales, and you've got the presumption of innocence. You're here. It takes a minute to get up here. There's got to be some good evidence to get you even close to being even. And then you got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that one theory, that her finger was on that trigger and shot him, is the only theory you can come up with. And they proved it beyond proved it. They proved that he had diabetes, and I don't know where that's going. But by the sister saying he had it, they proved it. By saying that detectives twisted her story up, but then kept coming back and correcting it, that she had a finger on the trigger the whole time. When you heard the struggle, you saw the position, there's no way it occurred. And you've got to believe that that one theory is the only plausible theory that occurred. But you saw in the demonstration, there's three, possibly two, hell, possibly four other theories that when he grabbed that gun, how that trigger went off. And that trigger went off while this young lady is sitting there, scared out of her mind. Never been in a situation before. Here's somebody, I got something for you. Leaning back, getting the trigger, and pow, click. Shoot. He pulled the trigger. You heard the click. And they didn't seem that was important. That basically, when it comes down to trials, as I said, verdict is an individual honestly seeking the truth of what happened. And I stated that to the prosecution. Verdict means seeking a conviction. Seeking a conviction. So they come in here with boxes. And they got these boxes. And they only want you to see what's in this box. Because if you see only what's in that box, you may see it the same way they did. My job was to get as much evidence out as I could. And I tried, and you saw I fought a little harder than I should sometimes. But I wanted to make sure you saw everything. And I believe that you have enough knowledge, intelligence to see really what's going on. And I told you that no matter what happened, I want to get all this evidence out there, so when you make your decision, you can look the state in the eyes, and you can look this Payne in the eyes. You can look at it and say, you know what? I hate to say it, State, but you didn't prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge told me, when I look at it, I need to look at these factors, follow this law, and they must prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And they didn't. They didn't put up enough evidence. They didn't show beyond a reasonable doubt that certain things happened and that certain things, there's no other theory. But with the evidence we were able to squeeze out, we gave you those theories. We gave you as much evidence to see the whole picture. And when you see that whole picture and you go back and you go through all the pictures and you go through your recollection of what the witness said, what the theories are, you're going to come back. And you're going to come back and say, you know what? I'm not supposed to listen to that attorney, but it made a good point. State didn't carry the burden. And I don't think I can sit there and look one person, one side, in the eye, and say that it was fair and I did it from the evidence given there. But you've heard it, you've seen it. I don't want to take more of your time. I know that's after lunch, y'all are about to fall asleep. But I hope that you look at this carefully and come to the same conclusion that we've been saying for 4 years. If you hear all the evidence, if you see it all, this is not some killer. This is not some murder. This is a young girl that got caught up in the wrong situation with a good heart and good intention. And when she did it, her mind was not to confront, not to get in arguments, not to pull a gun, but to get the man just to go back. We don't know why he didn't go back. She didn't know why he didn't go back, but she sure as heck didn't think it was going to end that way. So, as you go back there, look at all the evidence, I feel comfortable you've seen enough, you've got enough information, enough understanding, enough experience to see really what happened. And the audacity of the state to say that you're going to find her guilty from the information they gave, I think different. I greatly appreciate your time. And I know it was a lot of time in a week, and I know y'all didn't expect that, but I appreciate it because I've seen you be attentive, I've seen you be listening, and I've seen those eyes wanting to seek the truth. And I hope you've sought enough truth so that you understand it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen, and even with the theory they have, there's still 3 other plausible theories of what happened. It comes down to they just didn't present a case that's beyond a reasonable doubt to convince you that Miss Payne is a murderer. Somebody just called you because she didn't like the bad driving. He's a bad driver. You heard the one girl up there, boy, she said she didn't raise a bit. She would not change her mind. But not Miss Payne. You never once heard her say, ooh, this guy's crazy. I think he's inebriated, but that's it. So I leave it to you, and I implore you to go back, look at the evidence, and do the right thing. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your attentiveness. And I appreciate when you come back and find her not guilty of all 8 of these charges, these heinous charges they put against her. Thank you so much.